They say life is made up of moments, little snapshots of time that you carry with you forever. For me, it was the sound of my kids laughing, the way my wife's smile could light up a room, the way our home felt like a safe haven, a place where nothing could ever go wrong. But that's the thing about life, isn't it? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it pulls the rug out from under you. I didn't see it coming. Not the confession, not the lies, not the truth that would turn my world upside down. But let me start at the beginning, back when I still believed in perfect endings. Sarah and I had been married for 10 years. We met in college, fell in love fast, and built a life together. 2 kids, a cozy home, and a future that felt as steady as the ground beneath our feet. Our daughter, Emma, was 7, smart, curious, and full of energy. Our son, Jake, was 5, a little shy but with a heart so big it could melt anyone's. They were my world, my everything. I thought I had it all. The perfect wife, the perfect kids, the perfect life. But perfection is an illusion, isn't it? And illusions have a way of shattering when you least expect it. It started with a confession, one sentence that changed everything. And once the truth was out, there was no going back. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always our quiet days. No soccer practice, no work deadlines, just dinner together as a family. But that Tuesday was different. Sarah had been quiet all evening, her eyes distant, like she was carrying a weight too heavy to share. I asked her if she was okay, and she just nodded, forcing a smile. But I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the air, like the calm before a storm. After we put the kids to bed, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. Her face was pale, her shoulders tense. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. "Sarah," I said, "what's going on?" She looked up at me, and I'll never forget the tears in her eyes. That's when she said it. The words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." My stomach dropped. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it would change everything. And then she said it, "One of the kids. They might not be yours." The room spun. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. My mind raced. How? Why? When? But all I could manage to say was, "What are you talking about?" Sarah broke down, tears streaming down her face as she explained. She told me about a mistake she'd made years ago, a moment of weakness she'd buried deep inside. She said she never meant to hurt me, that she'd convinced herself it didn't matter because we were a family. But now, the guilt had become too much to carry. I didn't know how to feel. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. It all hit me at once. I loved my kids more than anything in the world, but now I couldn't stop wondering. Were they really mine? Was the life I'd built a lie? Sarah begged me to forgive her, to understand, but I couldn't even look at her. All I could think about was the truth. I needed to know the truth. That's when I made the decision. I told Sarah I was going to take a DNA test. I had to know for sure. She didn't argue. She just nodded, her face filled with regret and fear. I ordered the test that night, my hands shaking as I filled out the forms. And as I sat there, staring at the confirmation email, I realized something. No matter what the results said, nothing would ever be the same again. The days after Sarah's confession felt like walking through a fog. Every moment was a battle, trying to act normal around the kids, trying to keep my anger in check, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. The DNA test kit arrived quickly, but the waiting, that felt like an eternity. I remember the day we took the samples. Emma and Jake thought it was some kind of science experiment. "Are we going to find out if we have superpowers?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with excitement. I forced a smile, but inside, my heart was breaking. How could I explain to them that this wasn't a game? That their dad was questioning everything he thought he knew about them? Sarah and I barely spoke during those weeks. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the things we couldn't say. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes, her eyes pleading for forgiveness, but I didn't know how to forgive her. Not yet. Not until I had answers. Work became my escape. I buried myself in projects, staying late at the office just to avoid going home. But even there, I couldn't escape the thoughts racing through my mind. What if the kids weren't mine? What would that mean for us? For them? I'd built my entire life around being a father. Who was I if that was taken away? At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our life together. The day Emma was born, when I held her for the first time and promised to protect her forever. The way Jake would run to me when I got home from work, his little arms wrapped tight around my neck. Were those moments even real? Or had they been built on a lie? Sarah tried to talk to me once. She came into the living room one night, her face pale and tired. "Daniel," she said, "I know you're hurting. I know you're angry, but please don't shut me out. We need to figure this out together." I wanted to scream at her, to ask her how she could expect me to trust her after what she'd done. But instead, I just nodded and said, "I need time." And then one morning it came. The email. The results were ready. My hands shook as I clicked on the link, my heart pounding so loud I could barely think. This was it, the moment that would change everything. I took a deep breath and opened the report. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The results were right there in front of me, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. Not yet. I kept thinking about Emma and Jake. Their laughter, their hugs, the way they called me Dad. What if that wasn't who I was to them anymore? What if everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie? Finally, I took a deep breath and started reading. At first, the words didn't make sense. I read them again, and then again, my stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't possible. Couldn't be. But there it was, in black and white. Neither Emma nor Jake was biologically mine. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My hands trembled, my vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might be sick. How could this be real? How could Sarah have kept this from me for so long? I loved those kids with everything I had. They were my world. And now I didn't even know who they were to me. I stormed into the kitchen, where Sarah was washing dishes. She turned when she heard me, her face falling as soon as she saw mine. "Daniel," she started, but I cut her off. "Neither of them is mine," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "How could you do this? How could you lie to me for years?" Sarah broke down, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said. "I was a surrogate, Daniel. A long time ago, before we even met, a couple paid me to carry their child. But when the baby was born, they backed out. They didn't want her anymore. I couldn't just abandon her, so I kept her. And then, when we got married, I thought it didn't matter. You loved her like she was yours. You loved Jake like he was yours. I thought that was enough." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All these years, Sarah had been carrying this secret, this lie. And now, because of her, I was questioning everything. My marriage, my kids, even my own identity. "You should have told me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You had no right to keep this from me." Sarah reached for me, but I stepped back. "Please, Daniel," she begged. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but they're still your kids. You're the only father they've ever known. Doesn't that mean something?" I didn't know how to answer her. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave it all behind and start over. But the other part of me couldn't imagine life without Emma and Jake. They were my kids, biology or not. But could I forgive Sarah for what she'd done? Could I ever trust her again? As I stood there, torn between anger and love, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Emma and Jake. They didn't ask for any of this. They didn't deserve to have their world turned upside down. And no matter how much I was hurting, I couldn't let them pay for Sarah's mistakes. But before I could figure out what to do next, something happened that made everything even more complicated. The doorbell rang. I opened it, and there stood a man and a woman I'd never seen before. "We're here for our children," the man said. And just like that, the ground shifted beneath me again. The moment I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. The man and woman standing there looked out of place, their faces serious, their eyes searching mine. "We're here for our children," the man said, his voice firm. My heart stopped. "Your children?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That's when it hit me. These were Emma and Jake's biological parents. Sarah came rushing to the door, her face pale with panic. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The woman stepped forward, her tone cold and determined. "We made a mistake," she said. "We want our children back." I felt like the walls were closing in around me. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything. I turned to Sarah, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "You never told me they could come back. You never told me this was even a possibility." Sarah broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I thought they were gone for good," she said. "I thought we were safe, but we weren't safe. None of us were." The next few days were a blur. Lawyers got involved. Papers were filed. The biological parents were relentless, demanding custody of Emma and Jake. And through it all, I couldn't stop thinking about the kids. They had no idea what was happening. To them, life was still simple. They were just kids. Innocent, happy, and completely unaware of the storm raging around them. I spent hours sitting in their rooms, watching them sleep, wondering how I could ever let them go. Emma had my laugh. Jake had my stubbornness. They were my kids in every way that mattered. But the law didn't see it that way. Biology mattered. Contracts mattered. And no matter how much I loved them, I wasn't sure if that would be enough. Sarah and I barely spoke during those days. The tension between us was unbearable. I was angry. Angry at her for keeping the secret. Angry at the biological parents for showing up out of nowhere. Angry at myself for not knowing what to do. But mostly, I was heartbroken. How could I fight for kids who might not legally be mine? And if I did fight, what would that mean for them? For us? One night, I found Sarah sitting in the dark, staring at a photo of the kids. "I never meant for this to happen," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to protect them, to give them a good life. I wanted to be angry with her, to blame her for all of this, but I couldn't. All I felt was sadness. Sadness for her. Sadness for me. Sadness for the kids who were caught in the middle of a mess they didn't create. And then I made a decision. I didn't know if it was the right one, but I knew I had to try. I called the biological parents and asked to meet them. I'm not giving up without a fight, I told them. Those kids are my family, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep them. They didn't say much, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They didn't think I had a chance. Maybe they were right, but I had to try. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about me or Sarah or even the biological parents. This was about Emma and Jake. They deserved a family who loved them. And no matter what happened, I was going to make sure they had that. The courtroom was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your heart pound louder in your ears. Emma and Jake were sitting in the front row, holding hands, their little faces filled with confusion. They didn't understand why we were here, why strangers were arguing over who they belonged to. All they knew was that their mom and dad were scared, and that was enough to make them scared too. The judge listened carefully as both sides made their case. The biological parents argued that they had a right to their children, that they'd made a mistake and wanted to make it right. My lawyer argued that Emma and Jake were already part of a loving family, that uprooting them would do more harm than good. And through it all, I kept thinking about the kids. Their laughter, their hugs, the way they called me Dad. They were my kids, no matter what anyone said. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, my hands trembling. I looked at the judge, then at the biological parents, and finally at Emma and Jake. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I may not be their biological father, but I am their dad. I've been there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every moment of joy and fear. I've loved them with everything I have, and I will never stop fighting for them." The room was silent as I sat back down. Sarah reached for my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. We were in this together, no matter what happened next. The judge took a long time to make her decision. felt like hours, days, even though it was only minutes. Finally, she spoke. Family, she said, is not defined by biology. It's defined by love, by commitment, by the bonds we choose to build. In this case, it's clear that Emma and Jake are already part of a loving family. Removing them from that family would cause unnecessary harm. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Mr. and Mrs. Daniels. I felt like I could breathe again. Sarah squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. Emma and Jake ran to us, wrapping their little arms around us. "We get to stay with you?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with hope. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, holding her tight. "You're staying with us. Forever." The biological parents left quietly, their faces filled with regret. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for them. They'd lost something precious, something they could never get back. But I also knew that Emma and Jake were where they belonged, with us. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Emma looked up at me, her eyes serious. "Daddy," she said, "are you and Mommy okay?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're okay, sweetheart," I said. "We're a family, and that's all that matters." As I walked out of their room, Sarah was waiting for me. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, "for fighting for us, for them." I nodded, pulling her into a hug. "We're in this together," I said. "Always." It wasn't perfect. We still had a lot to work through. Trust to rebuild, wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We were a family, not because of biology, but because of love. And that was enough. Looking back, I realized how much this journey changed me. It wasn't just about the DNA test or the courtroom battle. It was about learning what really matters. Family isn't about blood or biology. It's about love. It's about showing up, even when things get hard. It's about choosing each other every single day. Emma and Jake are my kids, not because of a piece of paper or a legal ruling, but because of the moments we've shared, the laughter, the tears, the bedtime stories, and the scraped knees. They're my kids because I love them, and that's enough. Sarah and I are still working through things. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight, but we're trying. And that's what matters. We're trying, for ourselves and for our family. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it throws us curveballs that knock us off our feet. But it's in those moments, when we're broken, when we're lost, that we find out who we really are. And if we're lucky, we find out who's really there for us, too. So, to anyone watching this, I want to ask you, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought for the kids you loved, even if they weren't yours by blood? Or would you have walked away? There's no right or wrong answer. But I hope my story makes you think about what family means to you. Because at the end of the day, family isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. If it touched you, if it made you think, or if it reminded you of someone you love, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Because stories like this, they're meant to be shared. And who knows, maybe my story will help someone else find the strength to fight for what matters most. Until next time, remember this. Love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. And sometimes that's enough.